everyone. Welcome to the latest episode of the Adapt Euro-Atlantic podcast. My name is Matúš Jevčák, the editor-in-chief of the Adapt Institute, a security and defense-oriented think tank based in Bratislava, Slovakia. Today my guests are the authors of the paper titled Ensuring European Societal Resilience to Future Challenges, MENA, Climate Change and EU Risk Management. The text is available on our website adaptinstitute.org. My first guest today is Katarína Ďurďovičová, a junior research fellow in our institute, specializing in security within contemporary geopolitical context. She also focuses on areas such as climate change, peace and security within the European Union, nuclear arms control, and the study of authoritarian regimes practices. Welcome, Katarína.
Hello, thank you, welcome.
Our second guest is Matej Kandrík, the Chief Executive Director and co-founder of the Adapt Institute. His interests include comprehensive defense, paramilitarism, strategic communication and propaganda. Welcome, Matej.
Thanks, Matej. Great to be here.
As the title of your paper suggests, we'll delve into discussing climate-related challenges in the MENA region, their impact on the EU, and effective strategies for the EU to address these climate-related risks and crises in its southern neighborhood. Now, let's delve straight into the topic. Katarína, could you please introduce your paper, highlighting its importance, primary findings, and recommendations?
Yes. So our paper focuses on the Middle East and North Africa, which is what we refer to as MENA region, where right now the European Union kind of finds itself in a very critical juncture, necessitating a reassessment of its engagement strategies. Our article argues that climate change, with its diverse impacts, has become a critical factor influencing security landscapes in this region. From rising temperatures to water scarcity to extreme weather events, the MENA region is facing very unique challenges that have implications not only for the people living there, but also for the global security, migration patterns and socio-economic stability. As the MENA region grapples with a confluence of climate change challenges, the article underscores the importance of transformative risk and crisis management policies. Our recommendations included building resilience at in the individual and community levels, developing advanced climate intelligence and early warning systems, and incorporating climate considerations into conflict prevention measures, and even proposing creation of a European Security and Crisis Response Corps.
Katka, thank you very much. Now over to Matej. What is your take on the subject?
Well, my perspective, when we agreed with Katka on writing this paper together, my approach was thinking through my background from the security perspective. And in this regard, climate change is usually coined as a threat multiplicator, impacting several other dimensions of security, which we surely discuss later, through immigration, radical extremism, driving internal conflicts and instability, etc., etc. So at the point which was really important for me to raise through this paper is the issue that in my opinion, we don't really spend enough time and efforts thinking about this region, especially in this context. For obvious reason, in the last 2 years already, most of the time of us is being occupied by discussing and considering ongoing war in Ukraine. Before we engaged a lot in discussions around great power competition and geopolitical shifts which are reshaping global security environment these days. But I always saw that the Middle East and Northern Africa are not solved issues. US and Europe both in a way walked away from the region after the decade of war on terror. With such a feeling like, okay, finally we disengaged and we don't really wish to being stuck with the problems with this region. But I think this is very short-sighted perspective, and especially we in Europe, we can't really escape the geography, the cultural ties, the demographics, which is connecting us both with North Africa and the Middle East. And the climate change was interesting angle how to look on all these topics in one package.
Thank you, Matej. It really seems that Europe's retreat from the MENA region would be unwise and risky and likely lead to the emergence of substantial threats directly affecting Europe's security environment. I would like to talk a bit more about those threats in relation to the EU. In your view, and by that I mean both of you, what are the primary imminent threats linked to the MENA region and climate change that have the potential to directly influence the security landscape in Europe? And how will this threat affect the security landscape in Europe? Katka.
So I would definitely start with, climate change has exacerbated a lot of existing social and economic vulnerabilities within the MENA region. As Matej mentioned, climate change is very much seen as a risk multiplier, and it helps, kind of targets every tensions that are pre-existing already in there. So I would say that most what will affect Europe, I would say it's increased migration and displacement. What we will be seeing from these exacerbated social and economic vulnerabilities that are happening, from that will kind of affect Europe's border control or social coercion or even political stability in the long run. Within that region, we also have, political instability and extremism that will also kind of create massive problems of kind of spillover effects into Europe's security through extremist ideologies and conflicts that will arise. And also, I'd say the last kind of what I think it's a very new aspect of what will happen is that we'll face energy security risks, as the MENA region is kind of very known for having its hydrocarbon reserves there. And right now we see that Europe is kind of going towards that region into investing in those markets. However, if these climate-related disruptions, continue, they will pose risks in Europe's security and energy security, kind of impacting our economic stability and more geopolitical tensions. So that's my take on that.
Perfect. Thank you very much. What about you, Matej?
Well, I would definitely put on the table migration, which I see as probably the most direct linkage between MENA region and Europe when we speak about potential risk and threats. Of course, it's also the issue which is probably the mostly politically loaded. If we remember the political discussions back in 2015 when we witnessed the big migration wave, which I believe right now we can already say that it really changed the political landscape in Europe and led to the greater support of maybe more national positions or far-right parties and movements across the continent. This stays very much with us. Especially, here in Slovakia, it's not so long time ago where some of our neighbors keep reintroducing border controls due to migration flows in Slovakia. It was a big issue politically before our early parliamentary elections. So I think migration is definitely on the top of the list. And I would also like to connect on what Katka mentioned, is really the presence of considerable minorities originally coming from the Middle East or North Africa in Europe, which we can see these days very active on the issue of Israeli-Hamas conflict. Which I am not trying to suggest here that specific conflict is triggered by climate change, but we see that how European streets of European cities are arena for political these calls and protests and demonstrations, which might in some cases have also some radical or even extremist elements. And this will continue, because one reason why people from the region flow in Europe in such great numbers is because they already have here their relatives, their family members, their friends, and it's only natural to follow the same path and come to Europe to, in better case, to seek better future, to seek employment, in not so lucky cases to seek other things. Of course, this came hand in hand also with organized crime issues and the others, but to stay on the same level, I would say the migration would be the most visible. But I totally agree also with Katarína on the changing energy consumption patterns in the Europe and in the region, and how to solve that in a way which wouldn't be directly conflicting our interests and interests of those countries right now. If we speak about maybe later about the Green Deal and other EU policies in this regard. So I think that would be for now what I want to say.
Okay, now when we have established the connection between the MENA region and the EU in this matter, and somehow analyzed the impact of the climate-related changes in the MENA region towards the EU, what would you say, which states or which regions inside the MENA region do you see as the most vulnerable as a result of climate change? What are the challenges that they are facing right now or in the near future? Katka, please.
So in our paper, we mentioned quite a few, but in a way, I would kind of start with, Yemen, Syria, and Gulf states especially are the ones that are facing a lot of problems even right now, and everything that's coming on with later on with more climate change and more climate-related issues are gonna just exacerbate their problems that was happening now. Another, I would say, is also the West Bank, what we're seeing right now, especially with kind of their water resources and how they have to face their challenges, and with decreasing precipitation rates and kind of scarcity on the freshwater resources, on both kind of on surface and underground waters. But this is not only the issue on what's happening due to climate change, but also on what's going to happen if they already have competition within the Israeli kind of settlements. So what is that going to happen if we already have climate change that's not doing anything to not helping them in kind of preserving that water, but also we have competition that's happening within that. So it's like all geopolitical issues or kind of in that region that are also exacerbating that. But yeah, so I see the West Bank kind of going towards changing towards the worst in the future, I would say. But yeah, so far, we only see the conflict that's been happening there. But yeah, we will see how that affects the future climate-related issues.
Thank you. It seems to me that, based on your answer, that especially the areas or states that are already deep into some kind of a conflict are the most vulnerable one. Yeah. Even when we are talking about the climate change effects. Matej, do you agree with this assessment?
Absolutely. And this is where I think we should get more nuanced, because the region internally is rather different. On one hand, you have very rich and well-developed countries in the Gulf, which are in completely different position to deal with the climate change impacts and all the challenges connected with it. And then we have rather weak countries, really with very conflicting and internal political instability, struggling for years with internal problems, which are in very different position from the Gulf countries. I would probably use Libya as a case study to explain this. There has been terrible storm, tropic storm Daniel, this September, hitting the Libya, ending up with more than 4,300 people killed and more than 8,000 people still missing. This was due to the strong wind, heavy rain, which caused several dams to burst. And this goes back to things like how properly maintained or not are some pieces of critical infrastructure in these countries. We can speculate if those dams were in better shape, they might not burst or not in that degree as we saw. Also, countries which are going through protracted crisis and have a recent conflict history tend to have very low level of public services, healthcare, etc., which are all just adding up to the existing problems. First, their ability to mitigate the crisis are very low, and when the crisis already hit, their way to recovery is way longer, harder, and adding up to the internal struggles within the country. So it's really a complex issue, and I think this is a good example how to explain why we should think about climate change as a threat or risk multiplicator.
Thank you very much. In your paper, you are mentioning also the fact that the EU has already been providing some kind of support to the MENA countries related to the climate change effect. Katka, what is your evaluation of the current EU strategy towards the MENA region concerning the climate change? What are the primary deficiencies or inadequacies you identify within the EU climate change and defense roadmap? Are there any?
So I would definitely say that the EU climate change and defense roadmap has some positive aspects, but also shortcomings. And that's why we kind of wrote that paper, because we saw that the shortcomings are really much an issue, and that has to be faced kind of immediately. I'd say the positive aspects, the EU has already demonstrated the commitment through their financial support. They have given 7 billion euro aid to the MENA region, which has, can contribute to climate change adaptation and efforts, like mitigation efforts. Then the EU diplomatic engagement in addressing climate change challenges in the MENA region is also essential for fostering cooperation and finding regional solutions to, any shared environmental issues that are within that region. There's also the EU itself has shown awareness of climate change impacts, especially in recognizing the need for a comprehensive approach that integrates climate considerations into various policy areas. And within the framework or within that roadmap that they have devised, it outlines 30 specific initiatives, kind of emphasizing multilateral partnerships, capability development, operational strategies within the climate security defense nexus. And, this kind of comprehensive approach signifies an understanding of the complex nature of climate-related security issues. But there are also shortcomings that kind of are identified. There's insufficient consideration of region-specific vulnerabilities, for example. Within the MENA region, in general, there's never a one-size-fits-all approach that is effective. And, this might hinder a lot of what has been done till now. However, once again, you have different countries within that region that are posed with different challenges, and if we take on one size fits all, it doesn't really work essentially in the long run. Then, ensuring effective coordination among EU member states and between EU in general and the MENA region is very crucial. And so far, coordination is lacking, and it can impede on the implementation of any coherent and impactful climate policies that are either proposed or will be proposed. I would also say that there's also limited capacity building efforts for empowering these countries to address climate change in as easy as it is. But if these efforts are limited, it hinders a lot of abilities to implement and sustain climate change adaptation and mitigating measures. We also have the security implications of it all. The roadmap itself may not adequately address the security implications of climate change and climate-related issues, such as water scarcity or resource competition, can have direct or very indirect security consequences that might require more comprehensive security strategy. And I think for now that is very much lacking, and it hasn't been developed yet to a full extent. It is being talked about on many different fronts, not even just within the EU, but also within on a global scale. However, these whatever roadmaps or whatever they have, they're trying to implement are not reaching their full potential and have yet not even addressed the minimum that is required. And I'm sure positively that there are some that have been trying to address it, but it hasn't been done adequately so far. So I think that's one of the main problems that, especially with the roadmap of the EU, that we are facing.
Well, it seems to me that there's definitely a space for improvement in that matter, and that was one of the main reasons, I guess, why you decided to somehow propose some solution how to improve that approach of the EU towards the region. Matej, in your view, what would be or what are the primary obstacles to executing the solutions that you are proposing in the paper within the MENA region? Could you expand on the potential geopolitical frictions or difficulties that may arise due to heightened EU engagement in the MENA region's climate-induced crises, particularly concerning regional power dynamics, for example? I just want to remind the listeners that you were suggesting 4 main areas of, let's call it, solutions in this matter, involving things such as building societal resilience, climate intelligence and early warning systems, climate conflict prevention and resolution measures, or even creating European security and crisis response corps. So Matej, what is your opinion on that? What would be the main obstacles involving the implementation of these measures?
Right. On the most general level, it's 2 things, and it's time and money, as usually with everything. Third thing I would like to add is maybe just the mental capacity, on the mental space to even think about those issues. As I mentioned in my very first remarks, I'm afraid that we have been looking on every different direction, to the east, to the west, to the Arctics, and not that much to the Middle East. And maybe now I'm speaking really from this perspective as a citizen of Eastern flank country, but I think it reflects even a bit broader that our threat perception here in Slovakia, not to mention Baltic countries, Poland or Romania, is very different from the perspective of the countries like Italy or Spain or Portugal or France, which used to be major players in this region. And this is going hand in hand also with some limitations, because while, for example, France certainly is very interested in these countries, their position to engage politically and diplomatically is somehow restrained due to some historical burden, we can say, and how it's instrumentalized by third actors, in the case mostly China or Russia, through different influence operation in these countries, which are steering the sentiment against France or other colonial powers, which makes engagement, to be honest, very complicated from the European perspective. And of course, Union, of course, is engaged very deeply with its own internal problems. and therefore going back to the time and money which can be spent on these issues.
Katka, do you agree? Are those the main obstacles?
I definitely agree. I wouldn't have said it better. It's very important to kind of have that in mind when we're talking about it. But also, I would also say not from the European side, but kind of from within that region perspective. I'd say it's a very the success of implementing anything new that requires very advanced any kind of infrastructure or technology. It might be very difficult, and it might be facing challenges within that region. Sometimes you're looking into what we can implement, but then the region itself cannot really handle what we are trying to implement. So we have to be very mindful of those. And we have the Gulf region, and then obviously we can the Gulf states, and we can send as much as we want and as much as we can. But for some states, it's unimaginable, and for them to even, they might be resistant to kind of change from their ways, and they don't understand the same way what we are trying to explain to them. And it will be very difficult in a very, I think, in essentially, and we will see how that go. I guess it's very difficult.
I would just to add up. I think it is really important that we need to come to the countries as a partners, not as mentors, not as teachers, someone who is going to show them how to do it properly, but really as a partners, and bringing through these projects also working places. And opportunities to develop business and economy in these countries. Because without that, any solution we can propose or implement from our external position will not be sustainable. And the moment the funding will end, those projects will end too. And we have to really think about long-term sustainability of these efforts, because with the climate change, as it's not going anywhere, just getting worse, we have to really think, I think, in this perspective.
If I also can add to that, I think there's a lot of countries that are also very highly corrupt. So we have to think of from that aspect as well, of how can that aspect kind of hinder any implementation of those policies and initiatives? And, having a more of a transparent government structure might help, but that's on a very long scale of what we can implement. And, that's very, I'd say that also very unimaginable to some. And, but it is what it is. And, you need just very transparent structures, and that might be very off the charts, but yeah, I think that's another thing that needs to.
And here I probably will push back a little, because while I totally agree that the transparency and the corruption is a problem, but we shouldn't do the mistake of being ideal the enemy of good enough. And sometimes I know it will strange. It might sound strange, but sometimes I think we should adapt more pragmatic approach and accept some level of corruption and some level of misuse of funds, which would still produce at least some results, as being on our transparency high grounds, and asking for things which are not deliverable from our partners, and giving advantage exactly to China and Russia and other countries which are coming to the region with their influence and their interest, and asking not much for them in regarding human rights protection or transparency and economic issues, which I'm not saying we should disregard or our standards, not at all, but being pragmatic is important.
Yeah, I think, Matej, you opened quite definitely up-to-date topic that has been discussed for quite a long time in the EU itself, whether to choose pragmatism over principles or not, or how to combine those two approaches to get the best results possible. But let's get a bit more specific? I mean, and in relation to your suggested recommendations, I mean, in the paper, as I said already, you are proposing some, let's say, sub areas of recommendations. Once again, I will mention them very briefly. Those are building societal resilience in the region, building climate intelligence and early warning systems, focus on climate conflict prevention and the resolution measures, but also creating European security and crisis response corps. Which of those do you consider to be the easiest or the most difficult to implement, or alternatively, which one should have the highest priority and why? Katka, please. Or Matej, if you want.
Well, I will start with the proposition for the corps, because that's somehow my brainchild, and I'm completely aware that creating such a corps would be very long shot. So the European Security and Crisis Response Corps. When my thinking on this was coming from, that we see increasing rates of deployment of military forces around the world to help to solve crises around the world, going from wildfires, floods, and different crisis situations, countries facing more severe crises, more prolonged crises, see that it's just we need more manpower on the ground to solve this extreme weather occasions and the crisis stemming out of them. And when we are looking for free in quote marks free workforce, we always send the military. But at the same time, when we are trying to now put our militaries on high readiness, on preparing on the new capabilities, to expand it, to be ready for really peer-to-peer or close-to-peer conventional conflict, as we observe the lessons from the Russian-Ukrainian war, we can simply do the same, these two things at the same time. Because using military force for crisis response will take their time, will take their capacities, will they take their resources, which they won't be able to use for training, for development of new capacities, capabilities, etc. It's simply we can have military forces in Europe as a multi-tool for different things, at the same time being super specifically prepared for one specific thing as a high-end conventional warfare. Therefore, I was thinking about having and building up a specialized force which would combine law enforcement with the crisis response, with some very basic and low-key military capabilities, which would be able to serve as a tool for European common security and defense policy, for EU missions abroad, as a light force to be able to quickly deploy it and use it in places where we need to use it. And I think this logic is pretty solid. Of course, when we come to discussing implementation and creation of such force, this is way more complicated, but I believe it's still way less complicated than never-ending discussions on possible EU army or European Union army, which is even longer shot than the corps I'm suggesting in this paper. So I think we can also think about it as a middle step, or like let's try creating such standing force on a small scale, to be used mostly maybe outside of the EU, but why not also in the EU as a support to national crisis response capacities, funded by the EU and under the common European Union command. So that's my vision, and I'm very aware that it's very highly aspirational, and it's not gonna materialize anytime soon, and maybe even never. But I still would like to have an argument that it's a reasonable direction to at least think about.
Do I understand correctly that you are suggesting that those corps would not serve only as some kind of an auxiliary advisory body to the national crisis response system, but they would be also involved in implementing the proposed solutions.
Yes, for example, going back to the Libya I mentioned, I can imagine the force being deployed to Syria in the aftermath of the storm to help to mitigate the mass loss of lives, to help with the humanitarian relief, food and medicine supplies getting to the people. To help to establish basic security, mapping the situation, gathering the intelligence where more directed and tailored recovery plans will be needed, how to rebuild, destroy the infrastructures and the cities, help to establish temporary refugee camps, etc.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much, Katka. What about you? Let's get a bit back to the to the broader question, I would say. First of all, do you also consider this part of your solutions as the most difficult or the most, let's say, important one? Or you see something else as having a higher priority or importance?
I definitely agree with Matej and what he said, and that is one of the most difficult and most challenging ones to implement. Especially because it involves so much and involves so much coordination and also cooperation, But I would say at least from my side and the way I'm viewing this region, it would be a little very easy, or like the easiest to implement would be, societal resilience. And as we said before, the region generally lacks the kind of resistance to change of how we can kind of combat climate change. And the existing communities already have so much practices that they share and what they are doing, but with kind of building the societal resilience, you involve all the local initiatives, community engagement and awareness programs, and it feels like it's genuinely feasible to start off with. And you kind of promote more of the sustainable practices and more of the economic resilience, which can be implemented, more incrementally rather than straight on. But yeah, I would view this as a high priority, very easy kind of easy to implement. I wouldn't say it's the easiest. None of them are easy. They are very difficult propositions that we have given, but I think they're all very feasible, but they just need a little bit more time, a little bit more specialty, and of what we can do essentially in the future, yeah.
I think this is really important, and thank you, Katka, for mentioning it, that this region had tremendous experience for living through rather harsh climate and weather occasions. It is nothing new for them. Yes, it's getting progressively worse, but we can maybe learn something from them, and especially on the very low individual communities, society level. These communities know how to live in harsh conditions, how to increase solidarity within their communities, and how to make it through the hard days. So there's expanding on that and supporting it in a smart way, which wouldn't make them dependent on the EU or more generally Western help or support, is a crucial thing, because if we make them dependent, that in the long run is making things only worse.
Perfect. Thank you very much. My last question of today would be actually related to the overall general trends that we can observe in the region. That are not very favorable for the EU as I see that. We can observe the escalation of anti-Western sentiments, often manipulated by non-democratic actors like Russia. European governments and institutions are facing challenges in presenting a security alternative post the US selective withdrawal from the MENA region. And we can also observe an overall, overly diminishing influence of the EU that was also proven by several MENA countries opting not to fully back the West's position against Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. Given these trends, does the EU even possess the capability, or is it even in the position to tackle effectively climate-related risks and crises in the MENA region?
Well, I definitely do think that it is feasible, and it's about the commitment, and I do believe that the EU has been demonstrating a lot of commitment within that, and it has been helping, and they have provided a lot of financial aid already, which it helps with the crisis that they are already facing right now. However, I guess we also kind of have to focus on the regional interests itself, and you have to kind of we know that it impacts European interests, and everything that they decide, it will directly impact us tenfold, I guess. And that we have, as we said before, there's a migration and economic stability that if we don't kind of tackle it in a right way, this will all hit us in a way that we wouldn't be prepared for. But we already know that even EU kind of helps, as I said before, the either there's financial aid or it's capacity building within that, kind of aiding with climate resilience or disaster response or any sustainable development plans that they have. But I would say that there's a challenge that always remains, and it's that because the resources that we're providing them, it's not really something that are allocated properly. So I guess that can turn on to us if the region is not properly dealt with. I guess that's how I see it. And, I don't think that generally what has been happening for the past years and the aggression of Russia on Ukraine, in a way we see it as at least from my perspective, I see it as we already have something established within that region, and I don't think that's going to hinder what we have done. But in the future, I guess we might see some issues. But if we stop now, then it will never be the continuality of it will be stopped, and then we don't know what else to do, right? And I think they know that as well, because they have been allocated so much, and we have been helping them, and we have been treating them in a way of, okay, well, we have to fix this problem that's been happening for so how many years,
Right. What I would say is, ostrich strategy is no strategy at all. I mean, we can stick our head into the sand and act like nothing bad is going to happen, which we, I think, keep trying to do for several decades in Europe. And now I think we are bearing the fruits, not only in the Middle East, but also with the Ukraine and other topics. But that would be for different discussion. For me, security or like sustainability starts with security. If you don't have the basic level of security, you can even dream about sustainability and going to direction allowing you to build real prosperity in the country. And this translates into that if we consider Europe is not an isolated island in the middle of vast oceans, but that the neighborhood is really highly connected, we can't afford retreating from the North Africa, from the Middle East, and look different way because we think it's too complicated, it's too expensive, our efforts are not going well. Because what we do, I mean, like those problems are not going to disappear, and we would have to spend all those money, all the time, all that effort in Europe to mitigate the problems on our borders and within our borders, because you can't really separate Europe already. It's already two-way interconnected with the regions we are discussing. It's always better to go outside and solve the problems where they are generated, when they are starting, not when they're already spilling over to our backyards and solving them just then. I mean, that's quite late to respond. So I don't really see an option, realistic option for Europe to not being engaged in the region. And yes, it is difficult. It's highly complex. We, in many aspects, are in disadvantage in comparison with Russia or China or US. But I mean, that's not excuse not to do anything.
Perfect. Katka, Matej, thank you very much for your time and insightful comments on this pressing issue. I believe that our listeners have enjoyed our conversation at least as much as I did, and I definitely recommend everyone to check your paper that is already available on our website, adaptinstitute.org, in case they want to learn more about the MENA region, climate change, and the EU risk management. Katka, Matej, once again, thank you.